Good afternoon, everyone, and Happy New Year. Welcome to this regular meeting of the Budget and Finance Committee. Today is Monday, January 7th, 2013. Got to get used to saying that now. I'm Paul Krikorian, Chair of the Committee. I'm joined by the Honorable Mitchell Englander, and we are ready to commence the meeting. We'll be taking public comment as the first item. If anybody, as of now, we have no public comment cards for general public comment. If there's anybody who'd like to offer general public comment, please raise your hand. Seeing none, general public comment is closed. That brings us to items 7, 9, and 10, which I would propose as being consent items. Mr. Englander, unless you have any questions or concerns about any of those items. Actually, those will hold until we receive another member so we can have a quorum to vote on those. That brings us then to regular agenda item number 6, which we'll hear now. What I'd like to do is hear items 6 and 11, and then we'll go into closed session and take all of those items after we complete the open session items. So if we can hear the report on item number 6, please.
Okay. Item number 6 is a CEO report relative to the fiscal impact, the impact of the federal automatic across-the-board spending cuts, otherwise known as
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Chairperson.
Sorry, before you begin, we've been joined by Mr. Kretz. Mr. Kretz, welcome. We now have a quorum, so before we go any further, I'd like to reopen public comment. And we still don't have any public comment cards, so now that we have a quorum, we can now close public comment and go to item 6.
Good afternoon, Chairperson. My name is Ben Sahan with the CAO. Before you is a report that we put together with respect to the impacts of the federal sequestration. As you may recall, over the last month and a half, there's been some serious discussions taking place in D.C. with regard to what's been referred to as the Fiscal Cliff. Meaning this is a scenario that the U.S. would find itself in if no agreements was reached between the President and Congress on what to do with some expiring tax breaks that were set to expire out on December 31st, as well as with some automatic across-the-board cuts known as sequestration that was also set to begin on January 2nd. What we did in the CAO is basically coordinate an effort citywide with respect to gathering impact statements from various departments that are dependent upon federal dollars. And some of those departments are here to answer any specific questions you may have with regard to their funding programs. But in essence, we have categorized some of those funding programs within housing, community development, and public safety. The impacts that were reported essentially say that if sequestration is allowed to happen, and now with the benign compromise, as some would say, it's been delayed for 2 months, set to begin March 1st, 2013. But the impact to the city would be about $115 million, according to the departments, of which a good portion of that is tied to public housing subsidies. $92 million within housing area, and another $10 million within community development, and another 9 in the public safety arena. If you have any more specific questions with regard to some of these specific programs, I know that the departments are here to answer those. I can answer any other questions.
So one question and it seems like the vast majority of this would impact housing, but there are some significant public safety grants as well, and the one that jumped out at me was the AB 678 funding. I'm trying to understand what the timing of this would be. If the deadline is March 1st, when were we expecting to get the AB 678 reimbursement under the current state's funding of this, and how would that impact that current funding reimbursement, if at all?
Currently our fiscal year budget for 12-13 assumes about $23 million coming from that specific program. That's AB 678. It's our understanding that here in the city we've done everything we can to submit our forms to the state, and then in fact the state has submitted its forms to the federal government. for consideration. And what we heard today was that there's a meeting planned for January 18th to answer some questions that the feds have relative to the submission from the state. The information we learned was that so long as there's some action taken before the end of February, it's very likely that we'll receive that money this fiscal year. But if basically February 28th comes and goes, then it's not likely at all that we'll get it this fiscal year. It's more something that will come in, but it will come in either very late in June or early next fiscal year. But how the sequestration impacts that specific dollar amount is unknown, at least to me.
So if there's an action taken prior to March 1st, even though as of March 1st that funding would be reduced by $2 million, according to the report, it wouldn't apply to what was already agreed to under the
That's
current-
my understanding. If there's some action taken before March 1st, then it's very likely that we'll see that amount this fiscal year.
Colleagues, any questions on this? Mr. Kretz?
My understanding is that we and other cities would lose tax exemptions for local municipal bonds. Have we looked at what the impact would be upon the city in that circumstance? And has that happened before? Or do we have anything to base what we anticipate on?
Not to my knowledge. I believe part of the across-the-board cuts would impact the city's ability to receive tax-exempt status on some of those bonds, but the dollar amount is probably something we would have to get back to you on as far as what we have.
I mean, if that makes, an incredibly high number of dollars unsaleable, that seems like potentially the biggest hole in our pocket of all the things we're talking about.
And that would be an impact not just felt by the city, but by all municipalities and everybody that issues tax-exempt status bonds. So,
Right. I mean, the good thing is we only have to worry about ours, but obviously one presumes there'll be a lot of pressure from every single city in the country on this issue. But were it not to be dealt with, don't we have? We must have the possibility of running out of money in a pretty significant
I was going
way.
to say, essentially, it's going to increase our borrowing costs and make us less competitive, on the open market. We lose if we were to lose exemption, then basically it's going to put us, the tax exempt, it basically comes, we end up being in sort of the taxable market, which essentially raises our rates, and so it just increases our borrowing costs once we go to the market in the future.
So we do actually think we'll still be able to sell these bonds?
We'll still be able to sell, but we won't be as marketable because folks won't have the tax advantage of the tax exempt.
I would think that would wipe out a whole lot of sales. That makes it very concerning.
but the reason I brought up the other entities is that we would be basically in the same situation as everybody else. So it wouldn't be a disadvantage just solely to the city, but everybody else that's dependent upon taxable exempt would be in the same boat as us. And so it's not a disadvantage just solely to the city, but everybody who depends on that market.
Mr. Engleman?
Do we have any action plans or suggestions on what should we be putting in place or what moves we would make and when those triggers would occur if these cuts were to take place and the likelihood or probability? Where are we at in terms of an update from Washington?
I'm not sure about specific actions plans the departments have as to whether or not, if and when they were to lose this funding. That's actually one of the recommendations we have in the report is for the council to instruct departments to develop some type of action plan to.
Do we have any indications then on probability on any of these at all?
None. I mean, that's kind of the action taken by the Congress and President was strictly to delay. There's still a lot of discussion going forward relative to what, if any, specific cuts will be made as an alternative to this more broad across-the-board type of cuts that are part of the sequestration. But in essence, we need more information from departments to, and that's one of the recommendations that departments develop a sort of plan for these cuts. We just,
So certainly the mayor's office, through their lobbying efforts back in Washington, we've been providing this information to them as they meet with various members of Congress. I know Senator Feinstein's office asked for this information, and so we've been providing it to various offices and parties, both internal to the city and also external as well.
Has the mayor's office formally asked the departments then to present their plan should these cuts be implemented? Has that been, or that's part of your recommendation?
that would be part of the recommendation, and for council and mayor to make that request, or instruct those, give that instruction.
Thank you.
We're joined by the Honorable Bill Rosendahl. Mr. Rosendahl, welcome. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to everybody here in the room, too.
Good to see you, Bill.
We're on item 6. Do you have
Yeah,
any
I just
comments?
want to
Mr.
know,
Rosendahl?
it says the CAO report estimates that the federal grants the city receives may decrease by 8% to 9%, but which equivalent is 115 million reduction this fiscal year. Is that what you're saying right now?
Yes, the across-the-board cuts, known as sequestrations, they essentially call for an 8 to 9% cut across the board, across all discretionary spending programs.
Yeah, and obviously, as the chair just said, what can we do about it right now, other than the obvious, which is talking to our congressional delegation, putting pressure on them and all the, 73 cents in every dollar we send back to D.C.? What do we do?
As mentioned, the whole reason why this report came forward was because we were getting requests to provide the details of what those cuts would mean here in the city of LA.
Yeah.
And so the ask went out to all departments to gather that information, and we compiled it in this report that has been shared with the mayor's staff out in Washington, D.C., and with several congressional offices. As far as what we should be doing here in the city, the report does recommend that departments be instructed to basically plan for the worst in terms of losing this funding on a go-forward basis, and
Okay, let me be optimistic. Our colleague, Tony Cardenas, God bless him, he's back there. Was he at least put on the committee?
that I do not know.
Could you find that out right away?
Sure.
If he's on the finance committee? Obviously, we want him on the finance committee. We want him to be chair of that someday. And the sooner he's on that committee, the more encouraged I am that his input is being received at the proper time. So I'd like to know right now, as best you can, maybe later today or tomorrow, of our folks from the LA area, how many got significant positions within what committees are they in, so we know where to strike and how to strike at it.
We'll make inquiries to our colleagues in D.C. to find out those committee assignments and
Yeah.
provide them back to you.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. So the CAO's recommendations are to instruct impacted departments to develop contingency plans for dealing with the loss of federal funding that does not rely on any offsetting funds from the general fund or reserve fund, and to instruct impacted departments to begin the notification process to stakeholders of the reduction in services that are likely to occur with the loss of federal funding. Without objection, that will be the action of the committee to approve those recommendations.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, I would propose that items 7, 9, and 10 be approved on consent without objection. That will be the action of the committee. Item 8, at the request of the city attorney, or CAO, at the request of the CAO, is going to be continued until we can...
Yes, if I may, basically item 8 is the city attorney report relative to the proposed inclusion of 47 firms in the 2012 through 15 attorney conflict panel. We're in the process of actually drafting a report to provide the committee a little bit more information, and we'd like just a continuance of the 1 week.
That's fine.
Thank you.
That item will be continued for 1 week. That brings us to item number 11.
And item 11 is a CO report relative to the second construction projects report, and we did release an addendum as well.
Yes, thank you, Ray. My name is Alma Gibson with the CAO's office. As Ray indicated, we are asking the recommendation to add an addendum report to GSD to provide them $400,000 for landscape improvements at the Police Administration Building. The funding is provided by RAP unreserved and undesignated fund balance. and the appropriation has been approved by the RAP Board as of January 2nd of this year. As you know, this report we do on a quarterly basis in order to provide you information about the various statuses of the major capital improvement expenditure program projects and general obligation bond programs. This report basically includes transactions that are needed in order to continue to keep these projects on track. I want to point out that in this report, we have approximately $20 million recommended in transfers and appropriations. Of this $20 million, approximately 2.5 is actually going to GSD as well. And this is for them to continue to do the deferred maintenance work on various city buildings as well as provide hazardous material abatement work. They're also going to be performing some work on some energy conservation type projects and also do work on various recreation and park project improvements. But the most important part of this report is that we are recommending the appropriation of $10 million in staff cost reimbursements from the various bond programs in order to ensure that the city departments get fully funded for their work on these projects. And the last thing I want to point out is that the impact to some of these transactions, actually to a couple of the recreation and park transactions, the impact to the general fund is going to be about $282,000 in terms of operations and maintenance. And again, these costs will be addressed during the city's budget process. And I do have representatives here who are able to speak specifically on some of these transactions if need be. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Colleagues, any questions on this?
Just
report?
curious on the
Mr.
tax
Rosendahl?
revenue bond, if they could just explain where we're at on that, its impact or potential impact
The impact on the, I'm sorry, what was that again?
on the use of tax revenue enhancement program. You said you have people that can speak to that.
Tax revenue enhancement program. Is this part of the report in the construction projects report?
Yeah. Or you just said a group was going to come before us to answer any questions.
All right.
So I think the question is whether you have any specific questions on any of the projects listed in the report for either Prop F,
yeah.
Prop G, or Prop Q?
Yeah, no, I don't.
Okay. Right.
Any
I'm sorry.
questions, colleagues? No? All right. So the recommendations of the CAO's office are delineated in item number 11. They're lengthy,
Yes.
but this is a routine report, so without
Exactly.
objection, the recommendations of the CAO will be approved.
Thank you.
That'll be the action of the
Thank you.
committee. Thank
With
you.
the addition of
The
the
addendum
addendum as
report.
well,
Oh,
so
yes,
thank you.
as amended by the addendum. Thank you.
Thanks, Ray.
Thank you. So that would take care of all of our open session items?
Now, have we received any cards on any of the closed session items?
We have not.
Items 1 through 5. Okay, we do not have any cards on closed session items, so public comment on items 1 through 5 is now closed, and the committee will now retire to closed session in this room. So if you're not here on item number 1, if I could please ask you to step out, and then we'll call you on items 2 through 5 as we get to them. All right, we are back in open session, and the committee has completed all of its agenda items. Without any further ado, we are adjourned.